My name is Eleanor Brooks, and I am 82 years old. I have lived in the same small town in Illinois my entire life. People here know me as the woman who built her own bakery from scratch and turned it into a local chain. I raised 3 children alone after my husband passed, and I never asked anyone for anything. I gave my heart, my money, and my time to my family. But on the day my granddaughter Sarah was supposed to marry, I stood outside the gates of a wedding venue I had never even heard of, watching as security guards blocked me from entering. Name? One of them asked without even looking at me. Eleanor Brooks. I'm the grandmother of the bride, I said, clutching the bouquet of flowers I had bought with my trembling hands. The man flipped through a list, looked at me with pity and said, "You're not on the guest list, ma'am. You can't come in." My heart stopped. I saw Sarah through the glass doors, laughing in her white dress, holding on to her fiancé's arm. My own flesh and blood, and yet she turned her head away when our eyes met. She knew. She knew I was outside. The whispers reached me, snide voices saying, "She wasn't supposed to come. They didn't send her an invitation for a reason." My chest tightened. They had deliberately hidden the wedding invitation from me. The family I had sacrificed everything for decided I was no longer part of them. I stood there under the glaring sun, as the guard asked me to step aside because other guests were arriving. Something inside me snapped. My years of kindness had been repaid with cruelty. I slowly turned, walked away, and dialed a number on my phone. It was my lawyer. "Mr. Collins," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in me. "Remember that venue we discussed last month? The one I told you I might buy for investment purposes?" "Yes, Mrs. Brooks," he replied cautiously. "Buy it. Today. Any cost. I don't care what they're paying for it, I'll double it. Then call the manager and tell him to shut everything down. Effective immediately." Within 2 hours, I owned the very ground they were celebrating on. The music stopped, the lights went out, and the staff announced the wedding was cancelled due to unforeseen circumstances. The guests panicked. Sarah screamed. Her groom yelled at the staff. And me. I stood at the entrance, watching the chaos unfold, holding my head high. I slowly walked inside, every step echoing like thunder. The chatter died as people stared. Sarah's face turned pale. "Grandma, what are you doing here?" she stammered. I looked her straight in the eye and said, "You didn't want me here? Fine. Now no one is here. Because this isn't your wedding anymore. It's my building." The room erupted in confusion, with family members shouting, accusing, and gasping. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The humiliation they had planned for me had just turned into the beginning of their downfall. As I turned to leave, Sarah ran after me, tears streaming down her face, screaming words that I couldn't make out. But I didn't stop. I knew that this was only the beginning. Because this betrayal, this deep wound, went far beyond an invitation. It was years in the making. And now, it was my turn to write the ending. But you might wonder, how did it all get this far? How could a family that I raised with love hide something as important as a wedding from me? The answer lies in the story of what came before this day. A story filled with secrets, lies, and a pain that burned deeper than any of them could imagine. Stay with me because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything about loyalty, love, and family. To be continued. Studio microphone if you want to hear how I went from a loving grandmother to the woman who took everything back. Don't miss the next chapter. Like, comment, and subscribe because this story is just getting started. I wasn't always this woman who could buy a venue with a single phone call. No, my life had been built from endless days of hard work, sacrifice, and faith that the people I loved would stand by me as I stood by them. My name is Eleanor Brooks, and long before that humiliating day at the wedding, I was simply a grandmother who believed her family would never turn on her. It all began years ago, not long after my husband Henry passed away. Losing him left a hole in my chest that nothing could fill. But I kept moving forward for my children, James, Laura, and Rebecca. I poured everything into them, making sure they had the education, the opportunities, the lives I had only dreamed of. I sold our vacation cabin to pay off James's student loans. I dipped into my retirement to help Laura start her design business. I even took out a loan in my name to save Rebecca's failing marriage when her husband ran up debts. I gave and gave, never asking for anything in return. First they were grateful. Or at least they pretended to be. Dinners at my house were filled with laughter, and my grandchildren would run around my garden while I baked cookies. I thought I was living my golden years in peace. But over time, their visits became less frequent. Their calls turned into texts. Their texts turned into silence. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 years ago, during Sarah's engagement party. She was my eldest granddaughter, the one I had rocked to sleep as a baby, the one who used to call me her favorite person in the world. I arrived at the party with a wrapped gift and a heart full of joy. But when I walked in, the room went quiet. "Oh," Sarah said, forcing a smile. "Grandma, you made it." The word stung. You made it. As if my presence was unexpected. As if I didn't belong. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking. But then I overheard Sarah whispering to her mother, my daughter Rebecca, saying, "Why did you tell her the time? She wasn't supposed to be here this early." My chest tightened. Why wouldn't I be supposed to be there? It was my granddaughter's engagement. Later that night, when they thought I wasn't listening, I heard Sarah's fiancé say, "Your grandma seems old-fashioned. We don't really need her meddling in the wedding planning, do we?" They laughed, and I swallowed my hurt. From that day, things started to change. I stopped getting updates about the wedding. When I asked Rebecca how the preparations were going, she would give me vague answers. "Oh, everything's fine, Mom. Don't worry about it." Fine. For months I heard nothing. Then came the dress fitting. I found out through a friend that Sarah had already picked her dress, and I hadn't even been invited to see it. I called Rebecca and she sighed. "Mom, Sarah just wants a small circle helping her. You wouldn't understand the style she's going for." I wouldn't understand. I had been a seamstress in my early years. I had made my own wedding dress with my hands. The insult cut deep. As months passed, I realized they were slowly cutting me out. There were secret meetings, parties I wasn't invited to, decisions made without me. My role in the family had been reduced to an afterthought. Still, I told myself it was their wedding, their choice. I stayed quiet. But the final blow came when I received a letter from the venue. Not an invitation, but an advertisement. It was a glossy flyer showing the grand hall where Sarah's wedding would be held. I stared at it for hours, waiting for an official invitation to arrive. Never did. I called Rebecca again, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "Honey, I heard about the venue. When's the wedding exactly?" "Oh, Mom," she said quickly. "It's nothing big, just a small thing. We didn't want to bother you with the travel and everything." Travel. The venue was just 30 minutes away. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. The realization hit me like a brick. They didn't want me there. My own daughter, my granddaughter, had decided that my presence was an embarrassment. For days I cried. I walked through my empty house, staring at pictures of happier times. Every room held memories of love I had given freely, only to have it thrown back in my face. But as the tears dried, something inside me hardened. They thought I was weak. They thought because I was old I would just accept it. They forgot who I was. I was Eleanor Brooks, the woman who built an empire of bakeries when everyone said I couldn't. The woman who raised 3 kids on her own. The woman who never backed down from a fight. If they thought they could humiliate me quietly, they had another thing coming. That's when I started making calls. I reached out to my lawyer, Mr. Collins, and asked about the venue. Coincidentally, it was up for sale due to some financial troubles. I had been considering investing in event spaces, and this one was perfect. I told Mr. Collins to start negotiations but to keep it discreet. While my family continued planning their exclusive wedding, I was working in the shadows. I reviewed contracts, signed papers, and moved money around quietly. By the time they finalized their wedding plans, I finalized my purchase. On the morning of the wedding, I put on my best dress, The one Henry used to say made me look like I owned the world. I drove to the venue with a smile, clutching the flowers I had bought, not as a guest but as the owner. The rest you already know. The guards stopped me, and they thought I was powerless. Little did they know, within hours, everything would belong to me. When the music stopped and the panic began, I stood at the center of the chaos, calm as ever. But what happened after I walked out that day? That's where the real story begins. You see, canceling the wedding was just the first step. The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined, and I was about to uncover secrets that would change everything, not just for me but for every single one of them. Because while they hid an invitation from me, they were also hiding something else. Something far darker. And when I found out the truth, revenge would be the least of their worries. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone. This is only the beginning of how I took back my dignity, my power, and everything they tried to steal from me. Don't miss what happens next. Like, comment, and subscribe to hear the full story. You won't believe what comes next. When I left the venue that day, the sky was dark with clouds, as if the world itself knew a storm was coming. My phone rang non-stop. Calls from Rebecca, from Sarah, from distant relatives who had suddenly remembered I existed. I didn't answer. I drove home in silence, the only sound in my car being the faint hum of the engine and the thoughts racing in my head. That night, as I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Rebecca. How could you do this to us? You ruined Sarah's wedding. You embarrassed us in front of everyone. Hope you're happy. I stared at the words, feeling my chest tighten, but then a strange calm washed over me. They were angry. They were angry at me. They had erased me from their lives and expected me to stay quiet. I put the phone down and took a deep breath. This was no longer about a wedding. This was about respect. About dignity. And if they thought they could throw me away like an old piece of furniture, they were going to learn a very painful lesson. The next morning I called Mr. Collins again. Mrs. Brooks, he said cautiously, the sale went through successfully. You're now the legal owner of the property. But, are you sure about what you did yesterday? This is going to cause a lot of tension. I smiled faintly. Mr. Collins, tension is exactly what they need. Now, send the official notice to every vendor who worked with the event. They will receive their payments from me, but I want it clear that the wedding was cancelled by the new owner. That should make its way back to them. When the notices went out, the fallout was immediate. My family exploded with anger. They bombarded me with calls, texts, even showing up at my door. I didn't open it. Instead, I watched from behind the curtains as they stood outside, shouting things like, "You're bitter," and "You've lost your mind." But the more they shouted, the more I saw the truth. They weren't angry because of the wedding. They were angry because I had taken control. They had built their little world on the belief that I was powerless. And now that world was crumbling. A few days later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. An official complaint. Sarah's groom's family was threatening to sue me for damages. I chuckled as I read it. Did they really think they could scare me with lawsuits? I had been through far worse. I met with my lawyer the same afternoon. Let them try, I said. We have the contracts. I bought the venue fair and square. They can't touch me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper here. The way they had hidden the wedding from me, the way Rebecca avoided my questions, it felt like more than just embarrassment. So, I hired a private investigator. Yes, at 82 I was playing detective. And I wasn't going to rest until I knew the truth. Weeks passed, and the investigator's report finally came in. I sat in my living room, heart pounding, as I read through the pages. What I found out made my blood run cold. Rebecca and Sarah hadn't just excluded me out of pride. They had planned the wedding to be a showcase for Sarah's new husband's family, a family with money and influence. And according to the report, Sarah's fiancé had made it clear that he didn't want any poor-looking relatives at the event. He had convinced Sarah that I would embarrass them, that I was too old-fashioned and wouldn't fit in. But there was more. I found out that some of the money I had given Rebecca years ago to save her house had been secretly funneled into Sarah's wedding fund. They used my money to plan a wedding I wasn't even allowed to attend. My hands shook as I closed the report. The betrayal was deeper than I ever imagined. They had taken my kindness and used it as a weapon against me. I looked at the wedding photos that had surfaced online. Sarah smiling, Rebecca looking proud, as if nothing had happened. They had tried to hold a small backup ceremony a week later, but it was nothing like what they had planned. Their dream had already been shattered. I thought that would be enough punishment, but my heart still ached. They needed to understand that betrayal comes with consequences, and I was going to make sure they did. I went back to the venue 1 week after the cancelled wedding. The staff greeted me warmly. They had quickly learned who really owned the place. I walked through the empty hall, imagining the chaos of that day, and then I made a decision. I would renovate the venue completely and rename it. No trace of their wedding would remain. But as I was finalizing the plans, something unexpected happened. A young woman who worked at the venue approached me nervously. "Mrs. Brooks," she said softly, "I thought you should know. I overheard Rebecca and Sarah arguing the night before the wedding. They said if you ever found out what they had done, you would destroy everything. They said you were old but still dangerous." I smiled bitterly. They were right. As I left the venue that day, I knew the next step was clear. They thought they had buried me, but I was going to show them that I was the one holding the shovel. What I was about to do next would not only shock them, it would shake the entire foundation of our family. Because I had one more secret up my sleeve, something they never saw coming. And when I revealed it, their world would collapse completely. To be continued. Studio microphone. You think buying the venue was shocking? You haven't seen anything yet. The next chapter will leave you speechless. Like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The day after I learned the full extent of their betrayal, I sat in my garden watching the birds peck at the seeds. The world seemed calm, yet inside me a storm raged. Sarah and Rebecca thought the worst was over because the wedding disaster had already passed. They thought they could move on, repaint the cracks, and pretend I didn't exist. They were wrong. I began to think back on all the times I had bailed Rebecca out of trouble, all the times Sarah came to me for help. I had paid for Sarah's college tuition when her father refused to. I had sold jewelry that belonged to my late husband to make sure Rebecca's home wasn't repossessed. And this was how they repaid me, by cutting me out and treating me like a burden. That night, I opened my old safe and pulled out a stack of documents. Among them were the deeds to several properties they had no idea I still owned. Over the years, I had invested quietly in real estate, something Henry had taught me to do before he passed. While they assumed I only had the bakery, I had quietly built a small empire. Every house, every building was still under my name. As I reviewed the deeds, an idea formed, one that would teach them a lesson they would never forget. The first step was to make sure they couldn't touch any of my assets. I called my lawyer and rewrote my will, cutting Rebecca and Sarah out entirely. I left everything to a charity that helped single mothers start businesses, something I had always believed in. "Are you sure, Mrs. Brooks?" my lawyer asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "If they think I'm irrelevant, then they don't deserve a cent of what I built." But that wasn't all. I also placed conditions on the properties they were living in. Rebecca's house. It was mine. She had been living there rent-free for years because I had helped her keep it. Now she would have to start paying rent or leave. Within days, she received the notice. The phone calls came again, this time with screaming and threats. "Mom, how could you do this to me? You're destroying my life." I replied calmly. "No, Rebecca. I'm showing you that actions have consequences. You chose to betray me. You chose to treat me like I was nothing. Now you get to see what nothing feels like." The shock rippled through the family. Sarah's new husband tried to step in, telling me I was being vindictive. I laughed in his face. "You don't know vindictive yet, young man." While they scrambled, I prepared my next move. The investigator had given me one last piece of information, something they had been hiding even more carefully than the wedding invitation. Sarah's groom's family had been using her wedding as a business deal, expecting Rebecca to sign over some of my properties as part of a secret agreement. They assumed I was too old to understand contracts, that I would sign whatever was placed in front of me. But instead of signing, I exposed them. I sent the documents to the press anonymously, and within days, whispers spread through town about the shady dealings between Sarah's new in-laws and my daughter. Their reputations began to crumble. By now, Rebecca was desperate. She came to my house one evening, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please, you've made your point. Don't do this. Don't destroy us." I looked at her and felt a flicker of sadness. "You destroyed yourself, Rebecca. I only opened your eyes to it." She left, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I sat alone in the silence, feeling a mixture of pain and strength. They had hurt me deeply, but I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from Sarah. Her voice was trembling. "Grandma, can we meet? Just the two of us." Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe where I used to take her as a child. She sat across from me, eyes swollen from crying. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean for things to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you." I sipped my tea and said nothing. "It was him," she said, referring to her husband. "He made me believe you would embarrass us. He said we didn't need you there. I was stupid, Grandma. I was so stupid." For a moment my heart softened. She was still my granddaughter. But then I remembered the months of lies, the humiliation, the way she turned away at the wedding. Forgiveness wouldn't come that easily. "You made your choice, Sarah," I said coldly. "And now you have to live with it." She reached out to hold my hand, but I pulled back. "If you truly regret what you did, prove it. Until then, don't expect me to forget." She left the cafe in tears, and I felt a pang in my chest. But I knew I couldn't waver. This was bigger than feelings, this was about respect. That night, as I sat by the fireplace again, the investigator called with one final discovery. His voice was serious. "Mrs. Brooks, there's something you need to know. Sarah's husband. He's not who he says he is. He's been hiding a major scandal that could ruin not only his name but hers as well." I gripped the phone tightly. "What kind of scandal?" The investigator hesitated. "The kind that involves fraud, illegal dealings, and a trail of stolen money. If this comes to light, their entire marriage could collapse, and Rebecca could go down with them." My heart raced. Suddenly, I realized I held all the power. I could destroy them completely with this information. But should I? Should I deliver the final blow? I stared out the window at the dark sky, knowing that my next move would decide everything. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone, the secrets are just beginning to unravel. In the next chapter, you'll see how I used the truth to turn their world upside down. Don't miss it, like, comment, and subscribe because the most shocking part is still to come. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my window, staring at the moon while the investigator's words played over and over in my head. Fraud, illegal dealings, stolen money. Sarah's new husband, the man she had chosen over her own blood, was not just arrogant. He was dangerous. And Rebecca, blinded by ambition and greed, had tied herself to him without a second thought. At dawn, I brewed a pot of coffee and spread the investigator's files across my kitchen table. The evidence was damning. Fake business accounts, shell companies, and investments that didn't exist. He had even funneled some of Sarah's wedding funds into these shady operations. The man they thought would elevate the family was a ticking time bomb. I called Mr. Collins, my lawyer. "Eleanor," he said, his voice low, "if this information is correct, you're sitting on something that could ruin not just him, but everyone associated with him. What do you want to do with it?" I stared at the papers for a long time. My hands trembled slightly as I said, "We hold on to it. For now." Why didn't I expose him immediately? Because timing was everything. If I moved too soon, they'd twist it and paint me as a bitter old woman seeking revenge. No, I needed to wait until the moment when the truth would hit them the hardest. While I planned my next move, Sarah tried reaching out again. She sent flowers, left voicemails, even wrote me a letter begging for forgiveness. She said she was trapped, that her husband controlled everything and she didn't know how to escape. Part of me pitied her, but another part remembered how she had willingly gone along with hiding the invitation. I stayed silent. My silence was louder than any words. Meanwhile, Rebecca was spiraling. She had received the rent notice for her house, and now the gossip about the cancelled wedding and her shady ties to Sarah's in-laws was spreading through town. The same friends who once praised her were now whispering behind her back. One evening I heard a knock on my door. It was Rebecca. Her face was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Mom," she said, her voice shaking. "Please, can we talk?" I let her in but said nothing. She sat on the edge of the couch like a child waiting for punishment. "I made a mistake," she confessed. I thought cutting you out was what Sarah wanted. I thought it would make things easier. But it's all falling apart." I looked at her coldly. "You thought betraying your own mother was easier?" A sob. "I was wrong. Sorry, Mom. Please tell me what to do. How do I fix this?" For a brief moment my heart softened. This was still my daughter, the little girl who used to cling to my hand. But then I remembered how she had chosen her pride over me. "You can start," I said, "by cutting ties with that man and his family before they drag you down completely." Rebecca froze. "What do you mean?" I slid the investigator's file across the table. She picked it up, her hands trembling as she flipped through the pages. Her face turned white as she read the evidence. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He told us he was successful. He told us he was clean." "Lies," I said. "And you believed them because you wanted to." Rebecca's tears fell freely now. "What do we do?" I leaned back in my chair. "We wait. We watch. And when the time is right, we strike." Over the next few weeks I kept my ears open. The more I learned, the more dangerous things became. Sarah's husband was planning to use Rebecca's name on some of his shady contracts to avoid suspicion. If that happened, my daughter would be legally tied to his crimes. I had to act fast. I called Mr. Collins again. "Prepare a legal shield for Rebecca," I said. "She may not deserve my forgiveness yet, but she's still my blood. I won't let that man destroy her." At the same time, I began making moves quietly, pulling my investments from anything connected to Sarah's new family, talking to journalists off the record, and setting traps that would lead investigators right to him. The storm was building and they had no idea. Then came the night everything exploded. I was sitting in my living room when I got the call. "Mrs. Brooks," the investigator said urgently, "the authorities are moving in on Sarah's husband. The fraud investigation has gone public. It's only a matter of time before it hits the news." Within hours, the scandal broke. Every news channel in town was talking about it. Sarah's husband was accused of embezzlement and fraud. Their assets were frozen, their businesses raided. Sarah's perfect fairy tale had turned into a nightmare overnight. Rebecca called me, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mom, it's everywhere. People are calling me, reporters are at my door. What do I do?" I said calmly, "You stay put. The shield I set up will protect you, as long as you cut all ties with him." She promised she would. For the first time in years, I believed she was telling the truth. Sarah, on the other hand, went silent. She didn't call, didn't text. I later heard she had left town with nothing but a suitcase. Her husband was arrested, and she was left to face the shame alone. The world finally saw what I had known all along. Behind their perfect image was nothing but greed and lies. As I watched the scandal unfold, I felt no joy. Revenge doesn't always taste sweet. But there was satisfaction in knowing I had protected myself, my legacy, and even the daughter who had betrayed me. Still, the story wasn't over. There was one last move to make. One that would cement my place as the woman they should have never underestimated. Because I wasn't done teaching them what happens when you betray Eleanor Brooks. The next step would shock them more than anything I had done so far. And this time there would be no going back. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone. The storm has hit, but the final thunderclap is still coming. The next chapter will reveal the move that changes everything. Like, comment, and subscribe. You won't believe what I do next. The news of the scandal spread like wildfire. Everywhere I went, people whispered my name. At the grocery store, at church, even walking down the street, I could feel the stares. Not of pity this time, but of awe. They were seeing me for what I had always been, a woman who refused to be silenced. But I wasn't satisfied yet. While Sarah's husband sat in a jail cell awaiting trial and Rebecca hid from the cameras, I knew there was one final piece of this puzzle that needed to fall into place. My family needed to understand, not just feel, the full weight of what they had done. That week, I called Mr. Collins again. "Prepare the transfer documents," I told him. He hesitated. "Transfer? To whom?" "To no one in this family," I said firmly. "I'm donating the venue they tried to humiliate me in. It will be turned into a community center for single mothers. I want every trace of their wedding erased from its history." He chuckled softly. "You're making a statement, Eleanor." "Yes," I replied. "I'm making sure the legacy they tried to take from me goes to people who actually deserve it." While the legal papers were being drawn up, I planned something else, a gathering. Not a celebration, but a reckoning. I sent out invitations not to the town, but to my family alone. Rebecca, Sarah, my other children, and even Sarah's disgraced in-laws. They all received the same message. "Come to the venue you once tried to keep me out of. One night only. Everything will be revealed." They came, of course. Curiosity and fear are powerful motivators. When they walked into the renovated hall, they were stunned. The chandeliers were gone, replaced by simple lights. The lavish decorations had been replaced with photographs of the families who would benefit from the new community center. The place that was meant to showcase their vanity now stood as a monument to resilience. Rebecca approached me cautiously. "Mom, what is this?" I stood at the front of the room, tall and proud, my voice steady as I spoke. "This is what happens when you betray the hands that fed you. You tried to erase me, but I erased your lies instead. This venue no longer belongs to you or to your memories. It belongs to people who will honor it." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Grandma, please." "I didn't mean to." I cut her off with a raised hand. "You didn't mean to. You watched me be turned away at the gates and you looked away. That was no accident, Sarah. That was a choice." Her shoulders shook as she sobbed. "I was scared. He controlled everything. I thought if I stood up to him, he would leave me. And he did," I said coldly. "But that's on you." The room was silent. Every eye was on me, and for the first time, they understood that I wasn't just their grandmother or their mother. I was a woman who had rebuilt herself from ashes too many times to count. Then I dropped the final bombshell. I revealed the evidence of the fraud to everyone present, including reporters I had quietly invited to witness the truth. The cameras clicked as I laid out the papers showing the crimes of Sarah's husband, the illegal deals, the signatures he had forged. "This," I said, holding up the documents, "is what you chose over me. This is the man you thought was better than the woman who raised you." Rebecca collapsed into a chair, covering her face. Sarah sobbed openly, while her in-laws tried to leave but were blocked by security. The humiliation was complete. After the meeting, as everyone scattered, Sarah came up to me one last time. "Grandma, is there any way to fix this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at her and saw not just the granddaughter who betrayed me, but a broken young woman who had lost everything. "Maybe," I said softly. "But fixing it doesn't start with me. It starts with you." She nodded, tears streaming, and walked away. As the last car drove off, I stood alone in the hall. It was quiet now, but the air was heavy with everything that had happened. I felt a strange peace settle over me. The war was not over, but I had won this battle. Still, deep in my heart, I knew the story wasn't finished. There was one last act, one final move that would close this chapter of my life forever. And it would come soon. Because while they were licking their wounds, I was preparing to close the book on them completely. And when I did, they would never forget my name. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone, the reckoning has begun, but the final strike is still to come. Don't miss the next chapter, because what I do next will shock everyone. Like, comment, and subscribe, because the most dramatic part is yet to unfold. The night after the confrontation at the venue, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying their faces. Sarah's tears, Rebecca's shame, the stunned silence of those who once dismissed me as old and powerless. They finally saw me for who I truly was, but that wasn't enough. There was still unfinished business. My investigator's last report still burned in my memory. It hinted at more than just fraud. There were offshore accounts tied to Sarah's husband, accounts that listed Rebecca as a co-signer without her knowledge. That meant if the authorities dug deeper, they might drag Rebecca into the mess. As much as she had hurt me, I couldn't let her be destroyed completely. She was my daughter, and deep down I still loved her. The next morning I drove to the courthouse. My lawyer was already waiting with the necessary documents. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Mr. Collins asked. "I'm sure," I said. "Rebecca may have betrayed me, but she won't go down for crimes she didn't commit. I'll clear her name, but she'll never forget the price of my mercy." I signed the papers, moving Rebecca's name off any documents that could tie her to her ex-son-in-law's fraud. It was a risky move, one that cost me leverage, but it had to be done. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a journalist. "Mrs. Brooks, we've been following this story closely. Would you be willing to give an exclusive interview about what happened?" I hesitated. The thought of going public was tempting, but I didn't want to humiliate my family further than I already had. Still, this was my chance to send a message, not just to them but to everyone who thinks elders can be walked over. "I'll do it," I said finally. "But on my terms." The interview aired 2 days later. I sat calmly in front of the cameras telling my story. How they hid the wedding invite, how they tried to erase me, how I reclaimed my power. I didn't name them directly, but the world knew who I was talking about. When the interview ended, my phone blew up. Messages of support poured in from strangers all over the country. "You're an inspiration," one wrote. "You showed us that age doesn't make you weak." The support warmed my heart, but it also deepened the wound with my family. Rebecca didn't call. Sarah didn't call. Silence hung heavy between us. Then one evening there was a knock on my door. It was Sarah. Her eyes were swollen, and she looked thinner than I remembered. "Grandma," she said softly, "I left him. Have nothing. I don't even have a place to stay." I studied her for a moment. She was broken, but there was sincerity in her voice. Against my better judgment, I opened the door wider. "You can stay here," I said. "But understand this. You will rebuild your life from the ground up. I won't carry you. You'll learn." She nodded quickly, tears running down her face. "I will, Grandma. I promise." Over the next few days, Sarah stayed with me quietly. She helped around the house, cooked meals, and slowly began opening up. She told me how controlling her husband had been, how he isolated her from everyone, even from me. She admitted that cutting me out had been part of his manipulation, but she also confessed she went along with it because she wanted to fit into his world. I listened, my heart heavy. Forgiveness didn't come easy, but I began to see the scared young woman beneath the pride. Meanwhile, Rebecca still refused to face me. She sent me one text. "Thank you for protecting me. I know I don't deserve it." I didn't reply. She had to come to me on her own terms. While the family drama simmered, the authorities wrapped up their case against Sarah's husband. He was sentenced to prison, his empire collapsed, and the media frenzy died down. Just when I thought things were calming, a letter arrived in the mail, one that sent chills down my spine. It was from Sarah's husband, written from prison. "Eleanor, you think you've won. You think you've destroyed me. But this isn't over. I have connections outside these walls, and they don't forget. Watch your back." I stared at the letter, my jaw tightening. The man was still trying to intimidate me. He didn't understand. I had faced worse threats in my life and survived them all. Still, I couldn't ignore it. I called my lawyer, my investigator, and even the local police to ensure my safety. I also tightened security around my home. But deep inside, I knew this wasn't just a hollow threat. Men like him always have one last card to play. The calm that followed felt like the quiet before a storm. Something was coming. Something big. And when it came, I would be ready. Because I wasn't done fighting. The final act of this story was approaching, and it would be the most shocking one yet. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone, the danger is far from over. The next chapter will reveal the threat that could change everything. Stay tuned, like, comment, and subscribe because the climax is near. The morning after I received that letter, I sat at my kitchen table staring at it, my fingers tracing the ink like it was a venomous snake. Threats from a man like him were not to be taken lightly. I had seen enough in my lifetime to know when danger was real. This wasn't just empty words. This was a warning of something lurking in the shadows. I called Sarah into the kitchen. She was still in her pajamas, her eyes tired but softer than they had been in weeks. "What's wrong, Grandma?" she asked. I handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her hands trembling. "It's him," she whispered. "He's still trying to control everything, even from prison. You have to go to the police." "I already did," I said calmly. "But people like him have ways of getting things done. That's why we have to be prepared." Over the next few days, I noticed strange things. A black car parked across the street longer than usual. Unfamiliar faces around town that seemed to vanish when I looked their way. At night, the sound of footsteps outside my window kept me awake. I called my investigator, Mr. Daniels. "Something's not right," I told him. "I'll look into it," he said. "Stay alert and don't be alone at night." Meanwhile, Sarah tried to rebuild her life. She got a part-time job at a local cafe and started saving money. I could see her determination returning, but so was her fear. Every time she walked home, she looked over her shoulder. Then, one evening, I returned home from the bakery to find my front door slightly ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open. Inside, nothing seemed out of place, except for a single note left on my kitchen counter. "You think you're safe, old woman. This is just the beginning." I gripped the counter to steady myself. My hands were shaking, but my spirit wasn't broken. "You picked the wrong grandmother to mess with," I muttered. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the car outside was gone and the note yielded no fingerprints. Whoever was behind this was careful. That night I sat Sarah down. "You need to leave town for a while," I told her. "No," she said firmly. "I'm not leaving you here alone. I caused this mess, and I'm staying to see it through." For the first time I saw a spark in her eyes, the same spark I had when I was her age. I smiled faintly. "Fine," I said. "But you stay close to me. We face this together." The following week, I received an anonymous call. "You've made powerful enemies, Mrs. Brooks," the voice said coldly. "Drop everything or the next time we meet, you won't walk away." The call ended, but I had already decided. I wasn't dropping anything. I wasn't backing down. I called Mr. Collins and Mr. Daniels. "It's time to end this," I said. "Find out where this threat is coming from. And when you do, let me handle it." Within days, Mr. Daniels uncovered the truth. The threats were coming from one of Sarah's husband's business associates, a man who had lost millions because of the fraud exposure. He blamed me for destroying his deals and wanted revenge. Armed with this information, I went to the police again. They increased patrols around my house and advised me to stay with relatives. "I'm staying here," I said firmly. "This is my home. No one drives me out." That night, the tension was unbearable. Sarah and I sat in the living room, the doors locked, the lights dimmed. Every creak made us jump. At midnight we heard it, the sound of someone trying to force the back door open. I grabbed the phone to call the police, but before I could dial, the intruder stepped inside. He was masked, tall, and holding something metallic. Sarah screamed. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice stronger than I expected. The man froze, perhaps startled that an 82-year-old woman wasn't cowering. That pause gave Sarah enough time to hit the panic button on our alarm system. The siren blared, lights flashed, and the intruder bolted out the back door just as police sirens approached. They didn't catch him that night, but they had enough evidence to track him down in the days that followed. He was arrested, and with him, the last remaining thread of her husband's criminal empire unraveled. When the police told me the case was closed, I finally exhaled. The danger had passed. But the battle had changed me. I was no longer the grandmother they thought they could ignore. I was Eleanor Brooks, the woman who survived betrayal, threats, and even an attempt on her life. Still, the story wasn't over. Sarah was healing, but Rebecca remained distant. The family was fractured, and I needed to decide whether to rebuild those bridges or burn them completely. And as I stood in my garden that evening, watching the sun set over the horizon, I knew the final choice was approaching. The ending of this story was near, and it would be one they'd never forget. Because my last move would not just close this chapter, it would seal my legacy forever. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone. The danger may be over, but the final decision is yet to come. Don't miss the next chapter, because the endgame is about to begin. Like, comment, and subscribe because the most powerful twist is just around the corner. The days following the arrest of the intruder felt strangely quiet, almost too quiet. The police assured me that the threats were over, that the man behind the break-in would remain behind bars for years. But I knew better. Danger may pass, but the scars it leaves remain. Sarah was slowly returning to herself. She found comfort in routine, waking early, working at the cafe, and spending evenings with me. We talked more than we ever had. For the first time, she listened to my stories about Henry, about the struggles I faced as a young widow, about the sacrifices I made for this family. Sometimes she cried, sometimes she smiled. I began to see the granddaughter I once knew emerge from the shadows of the woman she had become. Rebecca, however, was another story. She avoided me completely. Not a visit, not a phone call. Only a few short texts filled with guilt and pride. It hurt, but I had learned to live with wounds that may never heal. One morning as Sarah and I had breakfast, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Rebecca. "Mom, I need to see you. I can't carry this anymore." I agreed to meet her at the very cafe where Sarah worked. When she walked in, she looked older than her years. Tired, hollow-eyed, a shell of the confident woman she once was. She sat across from me, her hands trembling around her cup. "I've lost everything," she said quietly. "Friends, reputation, even my house. But losing your love hurts the most." I stayed silent, letting her speak. "I was jealous," she admitted. "Jealous that you still had so much control, so much respect. I thought by cutting you out I could finally be more than your daughter. But instead I became nothing." Her words pierced me deeply. Finally I spoke. "You didn't need to tear me down to be something, Rebecca. You were always my pride. But pride without love is empty." Tears filled her eyes. "Can you ever forgive me?" I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Forgiveness isn't something I give easily. But you're my daughter. I can't stop loving you." She broke down sobbing, and for the first time in years she hugged me tightly. In that moment, I knew some wounds could heal, even if the scars remained. When Sarah returned from her shift and saw us together, she smiled through her own tears. "We're a family again," she whispered. But this reunion was only part of the ending. There was still one last move I had to make, one that would define how they remembered me long after I was gone. The next day, I called my lawyer and finalized the papers I had been working on for weeks. I wasn't leaving my fortune to Rebecca or Sarah. They would receive enough to live comfortably, but the rest, the properties, the investments, the bakery empire, would go to the community center and the charity for single mothers. When the paperwork was done, I invited my entire family to my house. They gathered in my living room, a mix of curiosity and nerves. "This," I said, holding up the documents, "is my legacy. I am leaving behind more than money. I am leaving behind a lesson. Never take love and loyalty for granted." You thought my age made me weak. You thought betrayal would break me. But it only made me stronger. Rebecca wiped her tears. Sarah held my hand. The room was silent as they absorbed my words. Before they left, I looked at them both. I forgive you, I said softly. But never forget what I did and why I did it. If you ever betray someone like this again, you may not be so lucky. That night, as I sat alone in my chair, a sense of peace washed over me. I had faced betrayal, threats, and heartbreak, and yet here I was, still standing, still unbroken. I thought of Henry, of the life we built together, of the love that kept me going all these years. I whispered to the empty room. I did it, Henry. I stood my ground. But as calm as I felt, I knew there was one final act left. Something I had been planning quietly all along. Something that would close this chapter with a thunderclap the world would not forget. Because the final wedding Sarah wanted so badly. It was about to happen again, but under my rules this time. The twist waiting at the end would leave everyone speechless. To be continued in the next chapter. Studio microphone. The final chapter is next, and it will reveal the ending no one expects. Don't miss it. Like, comment, and subscribe because the conclusion of this story will shake you to your core. The final chapter of this storm began with an invitation, one that I wrote myself. This time, no one would hide it, no one would decide who deserved to receive it. I sent it to every member of the family, to the few friends who had stood by me, and even to members of the community who had watched this drama unfold. The card was simple and elegant, written in my hand. You are invited to a celebration of truth, legacy, and new beginnings at the venue you once tried to keep me away from. Eleanor Brooks. Sarah's eyes lit up when she received hers. Grandma, what is this? She asked. You'll see, I said with a faint smile. It's time to end this story the way it should have ended. On the night of the event, the hall glowed with soft lights. The new name, the Eleanor Brooks Community Center, hung proudly above the entrance. The building that had once been the scene of betrayal now stood as a monument to survival and power. When the guests arrived, they were met with photographs of single mothers and children whose lives were already being changed by the center. The venue no longer represented a wedding that never happened. It represented hope. Rebecca walked in nervously, dressed in a simple black dress. Sarah walked beside her, holding her head high for the first time in months. They sat quietly as I stepped to the front of the room. I took a deep breath and spoke, my voice steady and commanding. Many of you know my story. Many of you saw me humiliated, betrayed, and threatened. But I am still here. Not because I fought with anger, but because I stood with strength. Tonight is not about revenge. It is about reclaiming what was mine and giving it a new purpose. The room was silent. Some people nodded, some wiped tears. I continued. This building will serve the community. It will give mothers a chance to start over, just as I once had to start over. My wealth, my properties, my name, everything I built will no longer serve greed. It will serve good. Gasps filled the room. Rebecca stood, tears streaming down her face. Mom, you're incredible, she said, her voice shaking. No, I said softly. I'm just a woman who refused to be erased. Sarah approached me, her hands trembling. Grandma, I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I promise, I'll spend the rest of my life honoring what you've done. I pulled her into my arms. Then do it. That's all I ask. Just when I thought the night would end quietly, there was a commotion at the entrance. A man, disheveled and furious, tried to push his way in, Sarah's husband. He had escaped custody briefly, driven by rage, but was quickly restrained by security. Eleanor, he shouted, his voice echoing. You ruined me. You think you've won. I walked toward him slowly, my head held high. You ruined yourself, I said calmly. And tonight, you see exactly what you lost. The police arrived and dragged him away, his shouts fading into the night. The guests stood in awe, and at that moment, I felt the last shadow lift from my life. When the music started and the celebration began, I sat quietly in the corner, watching everyone dance, laugh, and eat. The same hall where I was once turned away was now filled with love and respect. For me, for what I had built, for what I had fought for. Rebecca and Sarah joined me, one on each side. For the first time in years we sat as a family. Not perfect but healing. As the night ended, I stood one last time. "I want you all to remember something," I said, my voice carrying through the hall. "Never underestimate the strength of a woman who has been betrayed. Because when she rises with fire." The crowd erupted in applause. I looked around the room, my heart swelling with pride. This was the ending I had written for myself. An ending not of pain, but of power. When I went home that night, I sat by my fireplace, a smile on my face. Henry's picture sat on the mantel, and I whispered to it, "We did it." The story that began with humiliation ended with victory. And the legacy of Eleanor Brooks would live on long after I was gone. 'Cause they tried to erase me. But in the end I wrote the last chapter. Studio microphone, thank you for staying with me through my story. If this journey moved you, reminded you of your own strength, or taught you something about loyalty and love, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Your story matters too, and it's never too late to take back your power.